is a kind of pride of place before we break for lunch for Jeremy Sarchet, who, like Bob Levine, is a great repository of knowledge of the history of this department. Jerry Sarchet got his Ph.D. in 1951. He also was here prior to that getting an MA and an earlier degree at the University of Chicago. He was on the staff for several years after getting his degree, then went on to do work in industry before setting up a clinical practice with his wife and ultimately focusing on attention deficit disorder. But in any case, he has lots of wisdom and lots of stories about the culture and climate of human development back then and beyond. So I'm going to have a conversation with him for a few minutes here, and we'll see where it goes. This is going to be very informal, and I'm going to start by asking Jerry to tell us about the unusual way in which he met his wife in the department, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Is this thing working? Yes. Great. Okay. Maybe we're going to have some surprises this morning.
You're going to surprise me. I'm sure you are going to surprise me.
Okay, first surprise, we're going to deal with the physiological. So everybody stand up and stretch and take some deep breaths. You know, you've been sitting around listening and what have you. Let's get the blood circulating and what have you. And I know it's close to your lunchtime, so we want you to pay attention and not be thinking about that lunch, okay? Okay. Well, once Rick told me that I was invited to speak a couple of months ago. I've been spending a lot of not only my conscious time, but late in life, I've been worried. I'm 92 years old, and I'm worried that I'm sleeping a lot more. I'm taking 2 or 3 naps a day, and I'm wondering, am I wasting my time? Why am I sleeping so? And then I'm discovering, most of you men know, after about 60, you get up at least once in the middle of the night for bathroom purposes. And I'm discovering that I'm sort of half awake. Well, first of all, that I've been dreaming about something in disguise. Freud should have taught me this years ago. I'm dreaming of something in disguise that's related to something I'm struggling with in my everyday life.
Which is how to prepare for this talk.
Yeah, right. So anyway, what I'm getting at, I don't know what I'm getting at here. Anyway, okay. So one of the things I'm thinking about is the DSM-5 or 6, wherever it is now, describes my stage as a cognitive decline with normal aging, or more seriously with incipient Alzheimer's disease. And anyway, but then I'm discovering, hey, my dreams, I'm working on things in my daily life. And then secondly, I find that I'm thinking, conceptualizing, organizing things for the day ahead that is much better thinking than I'm doing when I'm wide awake during the day. So I've come to feel, well, hey, that's sleeping so much more, that's not so bad. Anyway, to start with
how you met your wife. And I'm going to tell everyone that you have given me permission to keep you on track, which I'm going to do, because I know that you could spend 10 hours here today, and that you have been making outlines and sub-outlines and drawing arrows about this. And basically, I have said, we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to keep you on track, and I want to hear about how you met your wife.
Okay. I was under the table. Now, you may think I was drunk at the time. This was in Herb Thielen's Human Dynamics lab on the 4th floor of Blaine Hall. A room almost this big with a circle of tables to study small group interaction. And he had electric switches under the tables where group members in a face-to-face group could indicate their pleasure or displeasure with flipping a red or green light or neutral. And I was fixing one of the switches under the thing. And I told my daughter about this and preparing for this. And a woman came in, and she suspected that I looked up under her skirt. I said, wait a minute, I said, she was 20 feet away. All I saw was her legs. But anyway, that's how I met my future wife.
All right, now we're going on to the second of 3 topics today, and that is tell us about Robert Havikhurst. This is Robert Havikhurst in what, sort of middle to senior age? And we'll get a picture of him as a young, dashing young man in a moment. But in any case, what about Robert Havikhurst and what he accomplished?
Okay, well, as I think about former faculty members, my memory doesn't come with a total picture. It comes with some saying from them. And from Bill Henry, the saying was, if you look at a person coming down the street from the standpoint of projective analysis, you ought to be able to tell a lot about his character. So let's look at Robert Havikhurst at about the time I came to the university. I think you would not say that he looks heroic or charismatic or what have you. More like an ordinary businessman on his way to lunch at the Rotary Club, right?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, the first thing that amazingly he did in the mid-30s, somehow he found out that Adolf Hitler, who was on the rise in Germany, needed hard American currency. How he found this out, I don't know. He also knew that Hitler had imprisoned a half a dozen prominent German Jewish psychologists in death camps and concentration camps. So Havikhurst went to the Carnegie Foundation, came out with a suitcase full of money, went to Berlin, negotiated Trump style with Hitler, and negotiated a ransom to release these 6 or so psychologists, brought them to the United States, and scattered them around major universities in the United States. How about that? From this little old Rotarian here. So let's look at him maybe 5-10 years earlier than this, and what do we see? What character there? To me, pretty unusual. A young man, but with some really special, persuasive and interesting characteristics, right?
So tell us about, do you know some of the people who he got released at the time?
Well, in preparation for this, I tried to look them up, and I looked up Bruno Bettelheim, Fritz Radel, and Kurt Lewin. None of them had been released by Hitler at this time. Bettelheim, who many of you know, was released as a celebration of Hitler's birthday, for goodness sake. I didn't go any farther to investigate whether this was a true story or not. Conceivably, it was a total myth of the culture of human development. But at the time I came in, nobody questioned the myth, and so it was part of our... You know the answer to that?
I just want to say, Ralph Tyler told me that he ransomed Bruno from Buchenwald in 1937.
Well...
when he was working for the Rockefeller Foundation.
Wikipedia's report is that it was... that Hitler, on his birthday, released Bruno Bettelheim.
I have a feeling the urban legend is going to have many transformations after this meeting today. And it's going to go on for several years, right?
There are 2 biographies of Bruno Bettelheim, and neither of them has anything to say on the subject.
Well,
So-
in my original introduction that I told Rick about, the idea that there are some really crazy things in our history and some very controversial ones, and probably Bruno is the most controversial. And things that came out about him in his later life lead you to say, hey, boy, he is not a heroic person. But he was brilliant, and he made a tremendous difference, particularly in my wife's life, who became a child psychologist, and our daughter, who also joined her and me in our clinical practice. So Bettelheim was, and actually, I recorded some of his conversation, of his teaching of veterans' wives after the war. He brought them in to our laboratory where we had recording, and I ran the recorder and what have you, and that became the basis for the book Dialogues with Mothers. And he was just wonderful with those veterans' wives and really moving. And for example, the idea of you've got to be a perfect mother, you know. No, a good enough parent was good enough for him. And the idea was teach your adolescent to deal with human beings in with all their warts and all, you know. You don't have to be perfect. Just be yourself and get your kid to realize the adverse people in the world by dealing with you.
So I told you that 15 minutes was going to feel like 3 seconds, and of course it's almost over. But you've already mentioned one heroic act, and I know that you've mentioned to me other kinds of involvements in HD, including Brown versus Board of Education and all sorts of issues about desegregation. But I don't want to get into that. What I want to get into is your current, at age 92, interests that continue to be issues having to do with impact on the world.
Gosh, we skipped over all these gems. Okay, about a year ago, before that in Whittier, California, where I was, the big political issue was whether we should allow new oil drilling, and I was in favor of it because the car industries had moved out. I became interested in global warming, and I decided I would learn about it, and as I learned about it and discovered new things, it became, I would say, the most profound intellectual activity of my life. And I've given all of my discretionary time to this for the last year. And, you know, started out, how can I influence the Paris peace conference in November? And I said, one of my friends said, come off the cloud, Jerry. Anyway, I'm still in. So anyway, you know, George Shultz was Reagan's Secretary of State. And wait a minute, I'm not going to go into this. Anyway, just last Sunday, I sent an email to George Shultz telling him, hey, why don't you get with Paul Ryan, who's going to be meeting with Trump on last Thursday, and try to convert him from the usual Republican denial of climate change. And Ryan said, invoking Lincoln and Reagan, I'm not sure we're going to let you, Trump, carry the Republican flag. And the almost unanimous Republican leadership is denying climate change. So I sent an email to Shultz to say, go to Ryan before he goes to Trump and convert him. So and I said, you may have thought of I haven't heard back from him. It's a needle in the haystack, but maybe. Anyway, you said we should get to what's the importance here going forward. Oh, God, our time, terrible.
In 1 minute.
Yeah, right. The first thing is the idea of physician heal thyself. Use your human development knowledge first to make sure that you, as Carlson called it, the machinery of the body. Oh, I got to tell you one of my jokes.
Go ahead.
Ann J. Carlson from physiology comes into the big class with a test tube filled with yellow liquid. He says, my lecture today is about the importance of observation as a scientific method. And this test tube looks to me like urine, and I smell it, and it smells like urine, and it tastes like urine. He said, now I'm going to pass it around, and while I give my lecture, you pass it around and repeat those same observations and what have you, you know. And at the end of the lecture, he said, how many thought it looked like it? Everybody raised their hand. How many thought it smelled? Everybody raised their hand. How many thought it tasted like urine? Everybody raised their hand. Well, that's interesting, he said, because personally I don't like the taste of urine, so I stuck this finger into the test tube and I tasted this one.
Jerry, thank you very much for being with us. Jerry came from California to this meeting, and I want to